I in no way am a fan of Garten of Banban. In fact, before this, I have yet to say a positive thing about the game, but I don't know what it is. Something about small, overly rough projects like it fascinate me in a strange way. If I ever had an offer to assist at all in the creation, be it voice acting, writing, you name it, I would accept with no hesitation, because a morbid curiosity comes over me and makes me want to see the process behind the scenes, how each little thing comes to be. A side of me is always craving knowledge and obscure research. And while learning good examples of media helps to develop a proper theory and formula for the good, beginner projects with a vibe of baby's first creepypasta always shed light on a new side to that research. How bad something can be, how to reach that state, and most importantly, what can be salvaged. Though I feel like this might already be negative enough to get me blocked by the dev team. As of starting writing this, it's currently April 5th, so only chapters 1 and 2 have come out. I haven't even uploaded my first video yet. I have roughly 4 scripts ready, 2 videos half edited, and I'm in the process of commissioning character stills. Hopefully that has a decent turnout by the time I have this video up. I'm already assuming at least 1 more chapter will be out by then, so know beforehand that the latter half of this video will be written a decent chunk of time after the former. Hopefully the game will still be relevant by then. This video is gonna be a sort of challenge for me, so don't take anything too positive as me being a genuine fan of the project. This is an attempt at seeing if I can conceptualize a way to salvage any gems from the rubble, and let my curiosity take hold. This is more a research project than an actual critique. Let's take notes. As a challenge, I'll also make some rules. 1, I must only compliment or critique the game. I can't simply say that something is bad or complain. I won't ridicule, only compliment and nudge towards improvement. 2, when critiquing, I can't just say to remove or throw out any room or mechanic. If I see a flaw, then I need to try and work my way around this flaw and see if it can be salvaged. I won't tear down, only polish. We'll call it the Trying to Be Nice to Garten of Banban Challenge, Impossible Edition, gone wrong, gone sexual, gone French, I don't fucking know. As a sign of good faith, I'll even try to make sure I pronounce the name correctly. The devs have apparently stated that the game is pronounced Garten of Banban, which only makes me think of Banban from Five Nights at Freddy's sister location, but I'll cope. In case you're not a native English or German speaker, the name is derived from kindergarten, an educational facility derived from the German word Kinder, meaning children, and Garten, meaning garden, basically translating to a place where children grow and develop. While I'm not the biggest fan of the title itself, I can't personally think of anything more fitting, so it's not really a subject I'm here to critique. The title works well enough on its own to convey the setting as well as the threat. You start the game in a room in which the cinematic is based entirely off of your graphics settings. You could have the entire area lit at high settings, or turn them down to give the game a more eerie and cryptic coat. One thing I would personally change is the default option to have a less horror-themed setting. Having a constant darkness around the player could definitely help to give a more unsettling feeling, and make players a lot slower to jump in, but a lot more fascinated by the horror and the unknown, driving them to delve in regardless. I also like how areas with no lighting at all are pure black, emphasizing the unknown and giving a feeling of unease when you think about what monsters might be in that darkness, watching you as you're the only one exposed. Before trying a change like this though, the light source placement should be adjusted to account for it. A lot of areas when placed in a darker setting become very difficult to see, making this not only act as a way of assisting the fear factor, but a way to arbitrarily increase the difficulty and show additional design flaws that weren't originally visible.
So apparently, that thing right there was a button. It's just bathed in darkness, so I did not see it the first time around.
After you explore for a moment, you come across a drone and a controller, and holding the controller causes batteries that you could have walked past prior to appear. This can cause a lot of confusion for someone who passed by prior and developed a false understanding that there weren't batteries in this area. You could make a slight tweak that the batteries can be got before collecting the controller, allowing it to possibly be used right as it's picked up by those who strayed down an unintended path early on. Or perhaps the controller can be paired with a keycard that's picked up at the same time, allowing access to a drawer or container that has the batteries. I'm just throwing out ideas, you can be creative with it. The player then goes down a hallway with the main antagonist of the first game peeking out at the end. This isn't a bad scene, but is a bit conflicting with the next area. You need to find eggs to feed to this creature, pretending to be a prop in the playground. This doesn't entirely work, as we just saw it moving, completely breaking the illusion of it not only being inanimate, but of it wanting us to think it's inanimate. Maybe if the creature were replaced by something else, perhaps an actual prop to give our items to, or having a different monster appear around the corner so that the player doesn't get the impression that this one is hunting in reverse. Upon getting the eggs, the player does a quick drone puzzle to get a hammer to the next area. The drone, I will say, is not flawed specifically in concept. In fact, I feel if given a lot of thought, it could be executed really well. Perhaps taking inspiration from duo control puzzles. Rather than pressing a button and having the drone beeline to the objective, what if you could control the drone more independently? Some inspirations that come to mind are something like the waypoint system you use for programming AI in Space Engineers. You could set a number of targeted areas with multiple numbers across the controller that correspond to the different locations you can send the drone to. Though theory and gameplay can diverge drastically, and I imagine this wouldn't be very fun in execution, so inspiration from it should be minimal at best. Another idea could be the button being replaced entirely with a tablet, displaying the front view of the drone and allowing full control of it and the player simultaneously, thereby allowing potential for situations like you need to run away during a chase, but try to focus as much as you can on the screen doing a puzzle with your drone to help you get out in time. This kind of split attention will be hard to maintain for players, though, requiring a balancing act from the chase choreographer's part. Outside of that, it could still help for duo puzzles where the drone needs to do something to progress the player, and the player needs to do something in return to progress the drone. Think something like a Portal 2 co-op puzzle, but both parties are controlled by a single player. I imagine your Q and E become rotational buttons, while perhaps something like F is used in turn for pickup. A similar control scheme used in games like Genshin Impact, where the player needs quick access to more inputs than they might commonly be used to. There are a few options for quick access to a move forward button, including Control if you don't need to move it while sprinting at any point, Alt if you don't need to move it and jump, or perhaps even Spacebar if you can refit the game to not need a jump in the first place. Most people dislike the parkour segments in the sequel anyway, so this edition is a viable one if they're adjusted to be more puzzle-focused than jump-based. Once done here, the player removes boards next to the creature in the other room and heads through. You're greeted by two buttons, one of which activates a lift that takes you to the other side of a ball pit, and the other being unusable. A ball pit being this deep is a bit strange and pulls the player out of the experience a bit. If anything, I would say make this something like a construction zone, saying something along the lines of they're building that secret underground lab you see in the second game, and the cover story being them simply replacing the floorboards or something. And they could say that they were looking out for the children's safety in this construction zone, and that's why they hid this door by boarding it up. And because it's only one small room, it makes sense that the rest of the school could still function. You could even change nothing aside from a small note saying that the cover story is a ball pit in construction, and that this area isn't intended to be the actual pit itself. Maybe once it's fully made, it'll have a hole only 3 to 6 feet deep, and a vague mention of a trapdoor at the bottom that will later be used to access the facility, with something at the bottom to catch or move aside the balls so that they don't end up draining, or maybe a button that causes an elevator to rise up so that people can access this hidden area underneath without the pit draining. Cover your bases here. I could go on and on about how this could be fixed completely with a single additional note, but I think it's time to move on. At the other side, you play a memory game where you match the monsters to their corresponding colors. I have no feedback for this. I personally don't see much room to complain. It, in a way, forces players to remember your characters faster, which I suppose might be necessary since the slow burn reveals, while not entirely bad in theory, make the characters far less recognizable as you have no attachment or emphasis on them as individuals. It can be lazy, but not enough for me to complain about it in more depth than that. After completing the puzzle and obtaining a keycard, the creature from before appears at the other end of the ball pit, coming over to the player and slowly pushing forward. It has a few stops as it observes the player, which has ups as well as downs. The devs explain that it's like a predator observing its prey before pouncing, getting a good look at the player. While this can be interesting, the exact scenario doesn't help the execution. The placement of the button and run distance towards the player makes it so that if this didn't happen, you couldn't really get away at all, giving a feeling that the game itself needs to wall off the monster chasing you just to make it possible to get out of a scenario that could have simply been choreographed differently. It also doesn't help that in the second game we come across this creature twice, and neither time does it do this again, making this the only time that it acts how it's stated to, only emphasizing that feeling of it being a necessary restraint on the hunter. A way around this could be to adjust the scene so that it has a greater emphasis on the observation, perhaps little animations and sounds of curiosity from the creature, pairing this with an event where the exit opens on its own, rather than the player needing to manually do it in a way that takes too long to escape regardless. It'll more emphasize this mechanic. Additionally, bring the mechanic back for the second game. Make it so that when the player opens a door to see the creature, rather than hiding deeper in, it could be right at the entrance. The player could run and be chased immediately, or stand in place for an Easter egg where it chirps curiously, building an aggressive groan and ruffling its feathers before finally charging in. It'll make this seemingly dead mechanic feel a lot more intentional. Once the exit opens, the player runs across, having a short chase scene before reaching the other side and running into an invisible wall. The player isn't shown a very obvious hint towards what to do. One small fix could be moving the stop button to the side wall, making it directly ahead of the player when they exit the path, since normally they would turn to have it end up behind them. It's placed in a very inconvenient spot for most to notice and know to use. Another quick fix could be to make the player use it once they first enter the room, allowing them to remember it for later, as the fact that it's first unusable makes its function unknown and renders it completely forgettable to someone in an adrenaline-fueled situation such as a chase scene. Maybe when first entering, the path is out, but not in jumping range, and the lift across is moving around too high to get onto. The button could close the path as well as reset the height and position of the lifts, acting as a system reset to all machinery in the room. That way, the player can see beforehand that when pressed, the pathway will close, helping them to remember that later on when they open it again. Okay, so off script here. Not fully off script because I have trouble speaking my thoughts clearly without one, but postscript here. You can skip this part if you want. I typically write and record the script before I actually record the gameplay, that way I can just beeline it to wherever's mentioned and record exactly what's needed to make editing faster, and to time the clips to sync a little better with the video. When I went to record this part in the game, it was far more broken than I was expecting. I'm just gonna play a bit of unedited footage so you can see for yourself. If you're wondering why I avoided the button when I knew to press it, it's because I realized I forgot to record footage of the invisible wall. But the fact that I soft-locked the game twice when I was actively trying not to is a bit of an issue. I think the cause was the bird jumping on the pathway too early and landing in the gap in the start of it. The bird's pathing either needs to be fixed or the pathway needs to be adjusted to account for this. This was honestly a massive oversight on the dev's part and a very severe issue. When you're done with that, you can head back to the entrance for an Easter egg. And in the ball pit, you find a secret 7th egg, which unlocks a hidden room. Personally, I feel like it would have helped to move the Easter egg into the hidden room, as the room itself is rather bland. After this, you simply go into the final room and take an elevator down, in which a new and much larger creature climbs up and breaks your elevator, stranding you in the facility below. This ending isn't bad by any means. It could be improved, but I can't say it's at all flawed. This part, I can't really give any immediate suggestions on a change or enhancement. Well, that's all I have to say about the first game. Now it's time I move on to part 2. The second game picks up immediately where the first left off. You're stranded deep underground with the monster in the ending cutscene dead next to you. I'm not a massive fan of this, as it was built up to be a central threat to the second game. Having it dead only a foot from the player right as you start is a bit of a letdown, and shatters any excitement to oppose this threat. You could have started with something like it being pinned under the elevator, still alive and moving, trying to grab at you, but unable to as it's stuck. This also gives an immediate idea for an Easter egg. Perhaps the player could earn a throwaway achievement for coming too close to this monster and getting killed by the easiest thing to escape from. I would name this random achievement Icarus, as the player comes too close to danger, thinking that it was too weak to cause harm. Another idea, though harder to pull off in a satisfying way, could be having to escape the creature shortly after start. You could make this a chase scene where the player needs to get through a door that locks behind them, but execution would be difficult to make satisfying. Maybe the game could start with a cutscene of this event instead. There's options, but the thread of this chapter is dead, so there's no point thinking too hard on possibilities lost out on. Entering the first area of the game brings you to a large abyss with buildings around it. There's a sort of city-esque aesthetic to these buildings, which is held back by the fact that this area is in essence a large cube. Perhaps you could make it a seemingly endless abyss with buildings rising from the dark pit below. This would be a bit strange, but could be incorporated into the lore in ways to account for this. Maybe this kindergarten was built over some cryptic underground civilization of monsters, and they have fully functional cities, which could be used to explain how they're intelligent and able to communicate with the player. Or you could adjust the style to feel more like this is an abyss room, with a more stable pathway between the rooms. Make this place a singular building instead of splitting it right here and adding external architecture. Between the 3 rooms, you're intended to go to the right. It's a bit strange considering the center area is the first place it guides you to, making players often assume they need to go to that door. As well as that, the panel is placed on the right, leaving the left arrow closest to the player. This can subconsciously nudge them to turn the bridge to the left first. In essence, the paths are designed to nudge the player in every inaccessible path before they finally realize where to go. I would remove the bridge entirely here, as it makes exploration quicker, easier to understand, and makes more sense from a lore perspective if there was a proper walkway. That could also fix the texture moving issue, as watching the bridge turn gives a similar visual to the outfit of a character in Chowder. Maybe add in a couple railings with tools nearby to hint that it's still under construction and they plan on adding in safety precautions without actually adding those safety gates. There are plenty of safety signs and railings around the area, so having such generous precautions to their workers while throwing in this unplanned access point at the very entrance feels like a small-scale continuity error. Beyond this point, we're introduced to the true main antagonist of this game, Nab, Reverse Banban. Except also he's a spider. I'm not sure if this is supposed to be pronounced Nob, but that feels like some kind of weird euphemism. I'm calling him Nab. Reverse characters are a writing subject I have no direct experience in and don't know how to pull off in a satisfying way, but having them carry no resemblance to the original character creates a vast disconnect between the two. Simply changing the name to something unique would make this character fit in a lot better. Here is where you get your first bit of voice acting. The voices of a panicked and distressed worker at the facility, showing that something happened recently, which likely caused a mass breach in the facility, endangering the workers and releasing the monsters. Likely the same event that caused the player's child to go missing. If we were to implement my prior suggestion to adjust the starting area to be more safe, a small bit of confusion could be hinted in his voice, vaguely mentioning that they took safety precautions, that nothing should have gone wrong. There was an oversight. The monsters planned farther ahead than they did. This would not only hint to you what happened, but show that these things are not to be taken lightly. As well as that, the actor here, played by one of the devs, might need to practice a bit.
Oh, thank God. I'm so glad you're here. I thought this was the end. I was looking around and walked into the security room. Then the door closed behind me and I've been stuck inside since.
Channel your emotions. Put yourself in the character's position. If you had a mass security breach and narrowly evaded a death that you've seen numerous of your companions fall to, especially in a recent time frame, your voice would be a lot more energetic. Voice acting can be hard, and that's understandable, but practice goes a long way when it comes to channeling that emotion in your voice. I personally have been doing some small vocal therapy for the past few years as I have throat issues and had trouble talking through a large part of my life. And I can personally say, while I still have practice to do, it's helped me be a lot more expressive. Perhaps do multiple takes of the character, find something to channel that fear, go somewhere isolated and put as much as you can into each line. It can go a long way to help. You then find a few different things, starting with a flat-screen TV which you're able to place a VHS tape into. This could easily be swapped out for something capable of playing a tape. Make sure your models properly fit the function they're given. This is a very strange error to find, and not a hard fix. Next to that is a room with an antenna to fix your remote and get your drone back. It's strange that this is the same drone, or any drone at all, considering that in the room it comes out of there isn't one nearby, and it didn't fall down with the player when the game started. This is when a drone first appears in the second game. You can then customize the drone, which I do like. Player expression is often good in my opinion. And it allows you to start the next puzzle. The puzzle itself can be interesting, though the lore behind it is a bit strange. I at least appreciate that they acknowledge that it was reviewed very poorly by the workers. I'm not sure how I can think of a satisfying way to re-implement this. Perhaps each desk has a number on it, as well as the one on the wall it's associated with. Then you enter the numbers on the desks in the order that the wall labels them. Maybe just call this a way for employees to remember. Like if they forget the third digit of the password, just call over to who's third on the board and ask. I really can't think of something solid here, so that's my best attempt. Entering the next room brings you to a maze with different colored arrows based on if they're pointing the right way or not. It's a bit strange and unnecessary. Rather than a maze for this area, you could have something more sculpted for a chase scene. While it adds a little more flair than a linear chase, it's still missing something. We could analyze the iconic vent chase from the end of Poppy Playtime Chapter 1 for inspiration. While that game does have areas to improve, most people can agree that that chase was excellently done. You go down various tight corners, running up ramps and down slides, through gates that open and close around you, giving vertical aspects to the chase to feel a lot more open. As well as that, your path will often be blocked off, or the monster will turn a corner that leads it right in front of you, making you turn back and find a new route. While this chase is still linear, going from one point to the next, it's the evolving path and unpredictability of it that makes it truly stand out. You may be going from point A to point B, but it's nowhere near a straight walk to get there. Something like this could really spice up this area, especially considering that the monster here can knock down the large racks and can climb walls and ceilings. If the area's size was expanded and the monster's abilities were more utilized, this area feels like it could be set up perfectly for a truly memorable and horrifying moment. At the end, you go up and press some buttons before going down to grab a keycard initiating the chase. As it currently stands, this chase has a lot of missing potential, but has a lot of room for improvement. You go back to find a note left behind, which I have to be honest, made me laugh. It's not massively funny, but it's a fun little addition to the game, and I enjoyed it for as much as it was worth. You're then knocked out by the worker assisting you, who is revealed to be Banban himself. He actually has an explanation for having assisted you before, which I appreciate, and mentions prepping you for surgery. Though this surgery isn't fully explained this game, but can be forgiven as there's still a lot of ground to cover in future installments. You wake up in a dark room with your drone. Keeping your drone is an odd choice. Maybe if Banban took it and placed it in a container that he didn't think the player could access, that would work. Perhaps he could have sealed it in one of the boxes, and the player needed to use the hammer from the first game to open it. He had no knowledge that the player has one. Perhaps he simply didn't notice it attached to the player's belt. When lifting the character, he might have felt it, but maybe he doesn't have nerve endings, or had to drag the player, not being strong enough to lift them. He could make his own document mirroring how others made them about him, with a small detail that he had to drag the player by the limbs, unable to lift them. He could make a small reference that either he needs to work out or the player needs to make carrying them around easier. As a hint, emphasize that he took the drone and the keycards out of the player's hands, and assumed they didn't have anything else on them as they only used those tools, so he didn't bother checking. And with your hammer still accessible, you reclaim your drone and escape. It's here that we find another issue with the drone. The puzzle is in a large area, asking the player to send the drone to spots just out of reach. You're required to get unusually close so that it can reach the edges of the puzzle room. Extending the range of the drone seems like a quick and necessary fix. You then ride up the first elevator that isn't foolproof and can softlock the player. Giving it the same treatment as other elevators is, again, a simple fix. At the top is a space where you're met by numerous monsters, all dead, aside from a very large one that can't fit into the doorway. You find a testing room where you pick up a needle and start extracting blood from the nearby bodies to fill a container. I like that the messages around explain the danger of the monster so the player can understand that attacking it will make a false opening. Once all the blood is secured, you get a rocket which is placed in a cannon just across from the large monster. A note nearby explains the bodies scattered around, along with information that the cannon prop was brought in, but not why. Perhaps it was for a play. It is a prop after all. A little description of its intended use could make it feel less jarring. Shooting the monster with the cannon scares it away and allows you to access a keycard which opens the back door, taking you to the starting area. There's now a giant monster emerging from the abyss below. This inclusion isn't bad by any means, and I can see why it's the moment that people least often criticize. The towering beast gives an ominous and horrific feeling and makes you wonder what else might be down there. Along with this, a trail of green liquid leads you to the very first room where Okay, so I know I said it's a shame this monster died, but bringing it back now isn't entirely a fix. The resurrection trope is one that can rarely be pulled off well and causes more issues than it could ever solve. Let's take a look at Five Nights at Freddy's 3, Pizzeria Simulator, and Security Breach for some examples. In the third game, the poster character Springtrap is shown to be the mysterious antagonist now known as William Afton this whole time. He gets ensnared in what's essentially an Iron Maiden, which is used to kill him. But he comes back, revealing that this monster the player opposes the whole game is actually the resurrected monster we didn't even know was dead. This works out well as we're less finding someone who died prior and seeing them come back, but rather finding out these two people are the same, one being a reincarnation. And at the end, you officially kill him off. But then it turned out he was actually still alive, so in a later installment you sacrifice yourself to burn him alive and officially kill him off. Except someone found him and preserved his body, so he comes back in the next game before one of the monsters takes him and officially kills him off. You see the issue here? Death becomes a meaningless concept. We're shown what it takes to kill a monster, then told, oops, it takes more than that, and suddenly they're back. From that point on, the monster has permanent plot armor because no matter how you kill it off in the end, the window has already been opened, and at any point you can say, well actually he survived that, and bring back what was stated to be officially undeniably dead. When a character in fiction has passed on, don't break the viewer's immersion. Death is the end. There's no coming back. We'll just pretend that my prior suggestion was put into place. The monster was never shown to be dead, only pinned down, but recovered enough to free itself and is still leaving a trail of blood everywhere it goes. This can be worked with. I'm not at all opposed to the idea. The player then goes to a room where they press buttons across the area to access a switch, opening a button at the top. The buttons are a bit strange feeling. Seeing the puzzles before, I feel something a little more challenging could have been added to this room. Don't let your creativity slow down. Keep making things feel different. If not though, then you could make it a single keycard swipe to open the door instead. This takes you to a very aesthetic hallway. I really like the colors and designs here, but I feel it could be adjusted for a more horror feel. This spot feels perfect for a dimly lit hallway trope, which can be very effective when done right. Along the way you find a poster foreshadowing a monster you see later on in this hall, and at the end you open a door with 3 buttons. I personally would condense this to a single keycard scanner, and on opening it you get an empty room with the bird monster's eyes in the darkness. This would have been a perfect spot for the Easter egg I mentioned last time. The bird just sprints at you with no hesitation. It would have been great if we could see that unique personality shine through here. It's really a shame that that was a one-time feature. Running back down the hall shows you a new figure who guides you to a school classroom. Her dialogue at times feels like it's trying too hard to be creepy.
Over the course of the semester, you will learn how to annihilate others, how to safely extract the human brain for eating, and... Oh, wait, I made a mistake. I think that's lesson 4 of the day.
I would suggest being more subtle. Instead of her being hyper and energetic, casually going over topics that feel a little edgy, she could instead have a more strict voice to match her very punishing teaching style. She could sprinkle in vague hints at punishments students get for failing their tests, leaving just enough up to the player's imagination to guess what unknown horrors she might do to you for wrong answers. Along with this, perhaps add in a more in-depth answering system, as well as a strike system. Make this a mini-game in itself, where wrong answers can build her harsh and strict tone, causing her to build frustration towards the player before finally snapping. But don't give her a ruler to snap or you might lean too far into Baldi's Basics territory. The change in her eyes could also be used for this, showing the stages before she's completely enraged and punishes the player. Maybe the recess segments could also be situations where you try and get answers from other students to help you with your test, or moments where you are given notes that allow you to study and find the answers on your own. At the end, the teacher is distracted by a voice outside, a second foreshadowing to the monster in the halls. While this isn't bad, a second foreshadowing could be swapped out. My first thought is that Banban could knock and she could answer, him searching for the player on his own rather than using the intercom, and could ask her where to find you. At that point, you escape. It's something that could work, but Banban was already established to have access to the intercom, and with those pieces in place, honestly, either option fits just the same. After you exit, you find the bird again, along with its 6 children. Placing them in the nest will guide the bird away, as stated to work in a note prior. The lights in this scene flash on and off a lot though, which when tested reveal to have no function. The bird's responses are unaffected by if the lights are on or off when the door opens, which makes this inclusion a little baffling. I would remove that, or find a way to incorporate it into the gameplay. Maybe the lights are set on a 10-second timer, and if a baby bird is in the dark, it becomes violent and will hunt the player down, making light a limited and valuable resource. Exiting this area will finally reveal the monster with the most buildup, the snail. This event with it is different from the rest and can be interesting. It boils down to a game of red light, green light, where you need to run from the snail in the openings it allows. If it gets too close or you move at the wrong time, you die. One issue with it though is that it can go through walls, allowing it to get the player even when they've escaped. You need to rush through the door and you have a narrow window to do that. For the creature with the most buildup, it's rather a short and disappointing moment. My suggestion would be to place the poster in the room with the baby birds, so it's not such a distant foreshadowing. The less time between the announcement and the reveal, the more suspenseful it becomes, and the higher expectation grows. The exit is a beach area with a target minigame, using cannons to hit buttons. This area feels very disconnected from the rest of the game, and my instinct is to scrap it entirely. I'm trying to salvage what I can while keeping the core of the game though, so I'll do my best to work with this. Perhaps if the area was a lot less saturated, a more eerie environment than a bright beach, this could be a designated prop room, which allows room to make it less pristine. The storage isn't going to be as polished as the rest of the building. You could dirty up the walls and floors, have props scattered around the area, and perhaps down the staircase could be the stage area. This could be the area that the previous canon is for. Have it decorated in some kind of pirate-themed children's play. Of course, this is all the underground part of the kindergarten, the hidden facility, whereas the children stay in the school on the surface. This could be part of the education for the monsters, though, as we've already seen moments where they try to educate the smaller ones. Perhaps this is some kind of experimental facility where they create small, childlike monsters that develop quickly, using them as test subjects to perfect education. Some kind of dystopian facility where they want to make humans advance faster, starting from the youngest age they can, and experiment on these creatures to figure out what methods can best imprint the most knowledge into their minds. That sounds like the kind of torture method I'm doing to myself writing this video. This stage is part of their education, as drama is a common field of study and a skill that many strive to master. Maybe you aren't told to shoot the buttons, but using your drone isn't fast enough to hit them all as they're on a timer. You then mess around, seeing scuff marks on the floor, nudging the cannons and finding out they can be moved. The player themselves set up the cannons and create a path to shoot all the buttons in time. Make it to where your goal is to get them all lit up at once rather than to do several rounds of shooting one at a time. Turn it into a challenge and a puzzle. You could also have the green character here to patrol and add some extra challenge and danger, assuming you make the place big enough to stop it from being annoying, but small enough that it doesn't become a non-threat. Taking a rocket back to the first canon reveals a secret that shows more of the game's lore. This also clears up the mystery of why these 3 new mascots appear out of nowhere, and also establishes a solid line that tells the player there will be no more in the future. This moment works well as is. I have no critique. The final area is accessed by getting to the end of a parkour section. Though the game's mechanics don't entirely fit this, I would say to work on developing some proper platformer controls. Air control can help a lot. Or if jumping were to be removed, you could possibly make this a puzzle where you have your drone move the platforms with precision to carry you, while risking the danger of being knocked off. There's some options for fun and challenging mechanics in this room, and there could even be a reference to the end of the first game, with the green creature emerging from the abyss as a threat for players not to take too long. And finally, you get to an area where all the monster doors are shown together. The placement is really odd, but gives a fun and abstract, very childish feeling, which is exactly what the game's style should be. Banban appears and gives a monologue where he tries to empathize with the player, but his motivations and reasons for betraying feel like they begin to conflict with each other. I would appreciate if the player had a voice here. It would be interesting to hear his beliefs challenged. Imagine if the player retorted him. He mentions how humans all tortured and experimented on him, and how you would just as quickly do the same. But he also claims that one of the monsters like him has the missing children and he needs to save them. He could be confronted with a contradiction. Are his kind all the same? Were he to find those children, would he be just as dangerous? Would he harm them? He could refute the player, getting flustered and angry, stubbornly clinging to his beliefs, but now implanted with a seed of doubt. Is he really a monster? If not, then can he really say the player is? He runs from these questions, knowing he won't be able to handle the answer after the things he's done. He's not the hero he so desperately wants to think he is, because regardless of what happens in the end, whether he's a danger to the children or not, he hurt innocent people, and you were one of them. A few of the doors open and you're chased by the teacher once again. The pathways branch out this time, with some being dead ends that make winning feel more of a coin toss rather than a challenge this time. Let's try analyzing the end chase of Poppy Playtime's second chapter to use here. The player comes across several branching paths that will get them killed, but there's always a warning sign. You can see a hand reach out to grab you, or a monster blocking off the way. It makes it so if you go down these paths and end up dying, it's your own fault rather than a gamble. You could make it so every dead end, rather than being a path you can commit to, is an entrance where a new monster emerges and joins the chase. After all, we just saw all those doors, hinting at this being the place they all gathered together. The teacher, the spider, the bird, maybe more. Along with this, the original main antagonist here has recovered from his injuries and joined in the chase. However, he only blocks you off at one point, blocking the chaser as well, making this a rather pointless inclusion, and can only hurt you at the end if you walk under his door after you yourself open it. Perhaps if he was more threatening here, acting as the shifting pathways, trying to grab you from what seems like a way forward and causing your path to change, it could make him feel a lot more active in this event. Once you get to the end, you take an elevator down to where the next monster is said to be holding the children. A giant orange jellyfig. The one who's being built up to be the main antagonist here. Let's hope that he actually is. You ride down before finding a poorly placed message telling you not to go down. Looking up reveals the snail, and the game ends. This was the first two games and all the major critiques I have. The last addition I would throw in is to be more selective about what stock assets you use, and try to make more of the art yourself, or hire someone to make it. I won't say you can't use any at all, but when you throw it in, it can conflict with the art style of its surroundings. An ideal plan could be to use original art and models for the majority of the game, and only use stock assets that can blend in with the environment you've established. They can help speed up the process, but aren't an all-aspect patch. It's now April 6th. The third game will likely be out before this video starts production, and if it is, then I'll write the next part then. If not, then this will be the end of the video. For now, I'm closing this document. I've been keeping timestamps of when I made which part of this video because I knew something like this would possibly happen. I'm also really glad that I keep digital copies of all my progress with friends as I ask for feedback too. Garten of Banban 3's release date dropped not long after I finished the first two parts of this video, with the game itself dropping today. And a lot of things I've said over the past 40 minutes have changed. As to not waste any of your time or mine, though, I'm leaving it unaltered and going over any changed views on those chapters as they come along, so you can see in real time how the last two chapters have retroactively been altered, as well as continuing into my compliments and critiques as I analyze this new third installment. Before we get into it, I feel obligated to do a small catch-up because of the massive time skip. Feel free to skip this part of the video, but I'll try to make it quick. It's now May 5th, exactly 30 days after I started working on this script, which I find really amusing. My first video came out earlier this week, and I'm ecstatic about its performance. It got 30 views in the first 5 hours and got 70 by the next day, when personally it was my goal to hit 10. Right now, it's sitting at a comfortable 129 views, and I can't thank the people who checked it out enough, and I really hope that I don't disappoint with my upcoming content. My character stills came out perfect as well, and in fact were made and received within the first 4 days of ordering them, almost a month before they were scheduled, which allowed me to start uploading much earlier than I was expecting. If not for that artist's phenomenal work, I would have delayed this channel another week. I order all of my art on Fiverr, and I link the artists of everything in the description, so I ask you if you at all enjoy it and want to commission the artists behind any of it yourself, make sure to check there. The thumbnails came out amazing as well, and here's a sneak peek at my third video coming out at the end of the month. Since starting the production of this video, I feel like I've grown a lot, as well as this channel, with the art coming together so well and my editing techniques developing with each video. I really hope that anyone who's made it to this point in the video enjoys this content, because I heavily enjoy creating it. Now, aside from my personal catch-up, it's time to catch up with how Banban has changed over the past month with this new installment. This game easily has the best aspects and most praise I can give without critique. At the same time, though, has some of what I feel to be the worst moments in the series so far. While I would definitely call this an improvement, there's still a bit of work to do before I can personally call it good. If I were to rank each of the games so far, I would say that this is the best, with the first game being a bit below and the second at the bottom. One thing I'm sure a few people may have also noticed is I skipped the hour segments at the start of each game with my critiques. To be honest, when writing the script, I genuinely forgot that they were there. I feel like these could have had more hidden in them, as each one has a few changes that make it hard to theorize or contextualize a story, and could be removed without the game feeling any different. If something can be completely scrapped without having any effect at all, then that's a bit of an issue. Perhaps if this was instead moments where we see experiments happening, similar to how we get to see and interact with the creation of Nabnalina, I feel like this would give the introductions a lot more relevance. Maybe even make them optional minigames like you would occasionally play on Death in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. On start, you wake up in a large room, which I already have to say is a step up in design. It could use a little more polish, some more detailed colors. Honestly, with how much the design has improved, my only critique could be that it has a vague hint of Play-Doh. But of course, with the setting and atmosphere, that isn't exactly a bad thing. After a moment, you hear Banban over the speakers, and I have a few comments. Of course, he had an apology and a few words of advice at the end of the second game, but Banban was a central antagonist. Not the main, of course, but played an archetype of mastermind. He was a villain who planned to mutilate the player and said that on any other day, they would be the one doing the same. He felt like he had a deep hatred for the player and only begrudgingly, well, admittedly still out of character, assisted them when he realized that their actions would benefit him if they're set free to act on them. Right here, he talks to you like a friend. He then justifies it, saying violence is in his nature and he can't assure the safety of anyone he's around. Okay, this explains why he was so mistrusting of the player, but why in Kunonos's name would he think he's supposed to be the hero here? He admits to being a violent monster. He admits to being unable to stop himself from acting on his destructive instincts. If he wants to save the children, as he claims, he should understand more than anyone that the best help he can give is to remove himself from the equation. Isolation is the only thing he can do. It seems like he at least learned that much by locking himself in surveillance. I still really wonder what his plan was if the player did get killed by his actions. And on that note, the other monsters to some level respect him, and as such, he can have some of them isolate with him. Leave the situation, get your friends to leave too, and not have to feel so lonely. What was the expression again?
3 stones with 1 bird.
Banban feels like he's making all the wrong moves here, and I feel his character needs to be expanded on to explain this, or he needs to be rewritten to have a more paralleled and unintentional antagonism to the player. You then collect batteries for your drone, as the remote has apparently died, and go into the next room to search for a keycard to the lift. To find it, you enter the cafeteria, and on the wall is a new character list. 2 more were added, and at least Nabnalina has an explanation later on for why she was added after the final list of kept versus abandoned characters. But this new kangaroo is strange. I suppose editing the room from the second game to showcase this as an abandoned character as well would help. It's a simple fix. You then collect crayons, or crayons depending on your dialect, around the area and dispose of them, verifying that the area is clean before getting the keycard out. I find a lot of amusement in the implication that this system is to ensure that janitors fully clean the area before they're allowed to go home. You then get a glimpse of Nabnab before leaving to the next area. There's 4 areas over a massive, dark, and unsettling abyss, an addition that I find enjoyable. And the current goal is in the designated aquatic area. You then do a simple drone puzzle here with decent distance that makes it feel really smooth. You then grab a keycard and go to meet Flynn. I really enjoy the spectacle of his introduction, but it is a little undershadowed by the model's quality. Though still an improvement in terms of optimization, I was pleasantly surprised to see that they tried to incorporate feedback and made massive improvements here. Though they still have some learning to do, this is a great moment both in and out of the game. There's a communication kiosk with a sign that hints Flynn is telepathic, something that's actually expanded on throughout this chapter, including right after when you get a chance to communicate with him. The dialogue is rather choppy and needs polish, but very thoroughly conveys to me what I'm supposed to think of his personality. Though what I'm supposed to think and what I do think does diverge a little. Something I also find rather amusing is how many references are in Flynn's dialogue and the visions he imprints into the character. I managed to spot a few Five Nights at Freddy's references in there, and even a Skyrim one.
Hey, you! You're finally awake.
And the references are implemented in a really good way, where if you know, then you know, but if the reference flies over your head, then you wouldn't even notice it was there. This makes it feel a lot less distracting than a moment where he says something from media you don't consume and you're left wondering what exactly it was supposed to mean. His first vision is right after the introduction, where he takes you to a beach with a vibrant ocean, bright sunlight, and a car, which actually ends up being relevant in the next vision, a touch that I can genuinely appreciate. While I do have some very strong feelings and critiques of this chapter, it's already feeling enjoyable in a lot of ways, which is a massive improvement. We're then given a vision of what I assume is Flynn when he first woke up in the facility, with Banban over him, now in a twisted, more demonic state. He wants to extract organs from Flynn to eat, most specifically his pancreas, which gives us more insight on what the surgery he referenced before entails. Playing as Flynn gives the player his powers, which for the most part entails a jump boost and a projectile zap. You then do the cannon puzzle from the second game. If my prior criticism of this room was in place, it could still function, with him now able to light up the buttons quickly without needing the cannons, and actually more solidifies my idea. He can enter his room without the cannons because he doesn't need them, as shown here, and as such it can actually make sense for them to not be shown as intentional, but merely something that can be used by the player's ingenuity. The snail then tells Flynn he needs to hide. I immediately assume the them being stated here is the scientists, but in another interpretation could possibly mean that Flynn isn't like the other monsters. That feels a little strange though, so I'm sticking by the thought of the snail talking about the staff here. The player then wakes up outside of the toad's prison. Though the toad isn't around for this game, he seems to be built up as an antagonist for the fourth. You go around collecting criminals and placing them in the prison to earn a key card. There's also a secret button that unlocks a tape to play. The key card unlocks a minigame where you jump on various glowing lights that make a small chime after activating. Jumping around on here outside of the minigame makes the floor light up and plays small chimes, which is rather enjoyable in my opinion. On beating this minigame, the door opens and you can leave. On exit, Banban tells you that Nab has been released and is on the hunt, and guides you to the medical center. He tells you that the workers started creating Nabnalina as a partner character to Nab in an attempt to calm him down. It's also shown that Nab is the correct pronunciation, which is a relief. You then play through a mini-game that's a lot more fleshed out than any other up to this point, and could possibly even be expanded into a Five Nights style game if the devs decided. Outside of the Banban series, of course, making it so vast and be necessary to progress would be a nightmare. This minigame is perfect as is. You need to balance the fuses and button pressing while injecting Nabnalina with 6 different mixtures to bring her to life. Failing makes her wake up violent. An interesting note here is that the mixtures are simplified using the primary colors, but anyone who knows color theory will spot an interesting distinction here. There are 2 sets of primary colors, additive and subtractive. This minigame uses subtractive color mixing, a property involved in the color of light. When you mix paint, you get additive color mixing. If anyone wants to skip this small rant, I put timestamps in the video so you can go on ahead. The additive primary colors are cyan, magenta, and yellow. I realized after recording that I got this backwards. I said that additive was CMYK and subtractive was RGB. It's actually the other way around, so know that I end up swapping them during this small rant. These are the 3 bases that all other colors are formed from. Cyan and magenta mix to make blue, cyan and yellow mix to make green, and magenta and yellow mix to make red. Mixing them all together overloads the pigment and makes black, or brown if the pigment isn't dark enough. And it's why printers use CMYK when color mixing. Light, on the other hand, is subtractive, where the primaries are blue, red, and green. Blue and red makes magenta, blue and green makes cyan, and green and red makes yellow. Mixing them all together completely strips the pigment and makes white, hence why digital screens use RGB for color mixing. It's just a really interesting choice that I noticed here, that the mixing chart is more in line to beams of light. And while I have no complaint, it has my mind racing at the possible implications of this. If this is a smoking gun for theorists to play with, then I personally find it to be a very effective one. I do have a complaint about the music here though, as it can get grating to listen to after a time. You then get an audio disc that can be played in the lounge, which draws in the 2 spiders for their marriage. The fact that this actually works is astonishing to me, but at the same time has been foreshadowed since Nab's introduction in the second game, so I can't really say it's unprecedented. This conclusion, while odd to me, is entirely fitting for the situation. There is an implication that either Nabnalina or Flynn immediately kills Nab though, and if it was the latter, that gives the possibility of Nabnalina taking his place as an antagonist, with the ironic twist that her partner was killed only moments after their union. But then again, we've seen characters implied to die and then coming back before, so who knows. Flynn talks to the player after this with hostility, furious that they hadn't left. It's really great that he's given a proper presence and antagonistic approach in this game, making it feel like we actually get a follow-through on the promise that he would feature heavily in this game. He then puts you in a vision of the majority of the cast, all on a road trip together, with varying quality in dialogue. But this still isn't entirely a bad scene. At the end, Flynn takes his eyes off the road to scold Banban only to immediately crash, throwing the player into another flashback. You do a target minigame with 3 waves, each having the targets move faster. This seems a little excessive. And at the end, you wake up in a dollhouse with Bambolina. She explains that at this point you need to find an escape and solve puzzles, all while avoiding the green monster who comes by every once in a while. To avoid him, you need to make sure that the room looks exactly as it did before he left. If anything changes, you die. But if it's all the same, then you can get back up and finish the puzzles. This mechanic gives the area a lot more depth and makes it feel like there's more of a challenge to it. It's unique compared to the other aspects, and I don't at all hate it for that. You can also find a secret room that the keycard activates and some notes and a puzzle left behind by the staff. A bit of the way through, Banbolina also tries doing some abstract math, and you need to manage her to avoid her changing the room. You then hit the end training button and leave the room with Banbolina. If you follow her all the way, she has some bonus dialogue. It's strange how the player doesn't pick up on the hint that she has some of the children in her classroom, but at the same time, these children may be the inanimate ones we've already met. You then do a few math puzzles and get to the next area. This I personally would condense to a simple keycard swipe. I feel like most players aren't here to do math, but it is helpful that they add an abstract twist to make it more of a puzzle than a direct quiz sheet. You're then introduced to Mr. Kebab Man, a meme character who I don't really consider a conflict to the established characters list. What I do find a conflict though is the next one, a boss fight against a giant Hydra turtle with... Damn, what'd that tongue do? So, anyway, you dodge its attacks and try to collect fireworks, which are then fed onto its fat tongue. After 3 fireworks, the boss is beaten. But again, as we've already established, we can't be sure of a death in this game. Beating the boss allows you to push Mr. Kebab Man, and if stopped at the right spot, he can open an Easter egg closet. This unlocks a keycard that takes you to a secret room where you can find a description of the genome cloy phenomena. The word cloy basically meaning something unpleasant caused by an excess of something otherwise pleasant, or too much good makes a bad. It can also mean an artificial plastic that resembles clay, so do with this information as you will. You then use him to scare away the baby bird and get a chance to grab it, which causes the parent to attack you. Jumping on its back from a high area, though, allows you to ride it. You're then shown a cutscene of Flynn in the abyss, and the cinematic of this scene really helps to solidify him as an antagonist here. It gives just the right energy for the feeling the devs want to convey. He also references that he saw into Banban's mind and saw that he was actually an antagonist the whole time, just as expected. But this still somehow just feels so wrong. Everything that's revealed about him in the story just makes me feel more and more conflicted towards him. I really want Banban to have a full rewrite, and I can't shake this constant growing feeling that his story is paradoxical in nature. They make him a man, but make him an animal. They make him try to kill the player, but willingly save their life. They make him your worst enemy, but your only friend. I have trouble wrapping my head around him, and I would heavily prefer for the conflict of character regarding him be entirely internal. Make it his arc rather than our riddle. Funnily enough, my main critique of Garten of Banban is Banban himself, and I feel he causes all of the issues that still pull me back from personally being able to like this game for anything more than irony. He then drops Banban and a chase scene starts. You need to balance the bird you're riding on with the one you're riding beside, and make sure that the one in the lead matches the color of the door ahead. If you get to a pink door first, or the other bird gets to a blue one, then you die. You then get a cutscene where...
Stop it, you two.
Well, we still can't say for sure that anyone dies. You go down an elevator and the game ends. Again, this game was a massive step up from the first two, and I feel like the devs have improved a lot, but there's still a few issues that prevent me from liking the series. This was actually a bit difficult trying to come up with ways to improve the game without removing any features, but it was a fun little project, and I'm sure plenty of these critiques could be expanded on, as I only have simple examples that came immediately to mind. And if anyone has any ideas for how they would adjust the game without changing it, feel free to discuss in the comments. I'm sure a lot of people would have a lot of various ideas if presented with the question, if you could add or edit one mechanic from the game, what would it be? But anyway, this has been the extent of my thoughts. That's all for now.